Good afternoon. I'm going to continue with my series on the 2006 World Chess Championship between Vladimir Kramnik and Veselin Topalov. The first two games were won by Kramnik, and the next two games were drawn. And before the fifth game, there was a statement by the manager to Veselin Topalov, and I'll just read some of that statement from the chessgames.com site on the match. Yeah, the careful study of the video recordings from the restrooms done by the technical experts of the Bulgarian team revealed the following facts, which we would here like to bring to your attention. After each move, Mr. Kramnik immediately heads to the restroom, and from it directly to the bathroom. During every game, he visited the relaxation room 25 times at the average, and the bathroom more than 50 times. The bathroom is the only place without video surveillance. Unlike Mr. Kramnik, the world champion, Veselin Topalov was the FIDE world champion, and Vladimir Kramnik, the PCA world champion. This match was to unify the two. Unlike Mr. Kramnik, the world champion Veselin Topalov spends his time mainly at the playing table. The average number of times he visited the restroom and the bathroom is 8 and 4, respectively. In our opinion, these facts are quite strange, if not suspicious. And then there was more to the statement. Should this extremely serious problem remain unresolved by 10 o'clock tomorrow, September the 29th, 2006, we would seriously reconsider the participation of the world champion, Veselin Topalov, in the match. This is the irony. The delicious irony, even though there's nothing delicious about it. After they reviewed the video, they found that Kramnik hadn't been to the toilet nearly as many times as Topalov's team had suggested, and they decided that since the allegations were so serious, they should close the private toilet and use a common toilet for both players. Kramnik's team rejected this decision and didn't turn up for Game 5, which was awarded to Veselin Topalov. Kramnik's team rejected this decision and declared the protest of the Topalov team and the suspicion in the press release of Mr. Topalov are utterly disgraceful and are touching Mr. Kramnik's privacy. The irony is just how can the person who was in the what became known as Toiletgate, accused in the Toiletgate incident, hold Paul, do what he's doing now in relation to, what he'd done in relation to Daniel Narodetsky, David Navarra. Who's his next victim? We don't know. That he's already been. Oh, sorry, I'll just get rid of that analysis. That he's already been a victim of such just makes it even more baffling to think that he done such. But yeah, the game number 5 was forfeited by Kramnik, and this is game number 6 and 7 were draws, and this is game number 8. Topalov has the black pieces, Kramnik white. And they play a fairly normal Slav defense. Remember, the pawn doesn't come to e6 to leave the way open for the bishop. The knight comes in, then the pawn comes to c6 anyway, like a semi-Slav defense now. And then the knight comes to b7, d7 to double up. It's called the normal line. It's very normal, and this becomes the Meran variation, I think, when he takes with the pawn and the bishop takes back and the pawn comes to b5, chases the bishop away. The bishop goes back to e2. I've said before that it's considered in master play not a good idea to move this bishop to e3 before the pawn is taken. But in this period, maybe for 15 years before the match and a little while after this match, it was considered okay to play the bishop to d3 allow the pawns to be taken and then allow the bishop to be chased. It was normal theory, so yeah. So the bishop is developed, comes to b7, and kramnik castles. Yeah, that's great. Pawn comes to b4. This is fairly standard theory. Now that you've disturbed the bishop, the pawn isn't doing anything here, so you can just disturb the knight and get either this square or this square for your knight. That's the idea. The knight goes to a4, but instead he plays to c5. It's defended by the bishop and the knight. So he's saying, take it, I'll take, you take, I'll take, you take my queen, I'll take with the rook, and then we'll see what happens. There could be a great number of swap-offs. So the knight takes, and the bishop comes to c5, b5, sorry, and says check. The knight c falls back, because if the knight d comes back, then it's actually pinned by the bishop. So when the knight takes, the bishop would have to take, and it's a bad position for black. So he takes with the right knight. The knight comes to e5, threatening the pinned knight, put pressure on the pinned piece, and the queen comes to c7, so that she can defend the knight there, and so that the rook is in a position to come to d8 and strengthen the defense of the pinned knight on d7. Yeah. So the queen comes to d4, looking at this pawn, among other things. The rook comes to d8, as we talked about, and the bishop comes to d2, threatening the a5 pawn, b4 pawn. Yeah, sorry. Threatening the b4 pawn, and the queen comes to a5 to defend the pawn. Bishop comes to c6. Obviously, if he takes, when he takes back, that's a fork on the queen and rook. But he comes out with the bishop, and the bishop comes to c1, and then the bishop is taken, allowing the fork. And now we've got a situation where the black has two knights against the rook. So 6 against 5, a very slight theoretical material advantage for Topalov, but he does have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 pieces against Kramnik's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if everything gets swapped off, Topalov will have a pawn extra and might be able to queen it. That's his idea. But again, it's about how well these pieces get coordinated. So, queen takes the pawn, so they're back to level number of pieces. Queen takes, bishop takes. Obviously, he can't castle now, but he comes to attack the rook anyway. The bishop comes to d6, and the pawn comes to f5. To give his king the square f6, definitely. The rook comes to c8, attacking the pinned bishop, and if he doesn't do something about it soon, then Topalov will be in a position to play bishop to c7, attacking the pinned piece. So the rook is attacked, and it comes to c6, attacking the pawn. Bishop comes to c7, yeah. If he takes, then the king takes, and the king is then defending the pawn. The rooks double up, and the king comes to f7. The knight is then pinned to the bishop, and the a pawn is attacked, so the rook comes over and defends it. Yeah, it's an attack on the knight, but it's not important. So the bishops are swapped, and the rook comes threatening to double, but still, it doesn't matter if he doubles, because he'd still be losing both rooks for both knights. Not good. But Topalov has to play a5 to prevent a4, a5 from white, chasing away the defender of this knight and then putting him in a position to win the knight. So the knight on c6, double threatened, and the pawn on e6. So it might be possible to think about sacrificing the knight for both pawns. That leaves 6 pawns against 5, so it might be possible to think about playing rook takes knight, knight takes knight, rook takes rook, and then white's playing with 6 pawns against 5. So, for that reason, Topalov moves the knight out of the way. And the king gives himself an escape square and takes up a bit of space at the same time. This is to combat the kingside expansion from white, obviously. And the pawn comes to combat the queenside expansion. But this one pawn now holds these two. Pawn comes to g5, and the pawns are swapped off. 3 against 3 on this side, 2 against 1 on this side. So, yeah. King comes towards the centre, that makes sense. Bit more space is grabbed on the king side. King comes once more towards the centre. It's knight to f6. Notice it doesn't say knight 5 to f6. Why? Because the knight on 7 can't move, it's pinned. So you don't need to distinguish, there's only one knight which can move. The pawn comes to e3 to support the pawn on b3 to support the pawn on a4. And the knight's looking for a new route into the game. Might be heading to d6, to e4 after that. Yeah, offers a pawn swap and he goes past. Yeah, no, it wasn't this. Yeah, and then it comes to f6, looking at the e5 square. Now, Raymond Keane, the British Grandmaster, second ever British Grandmaster, in his column in the Times, I believe, Guardian, I'm not quite sure, it's a long time ago, but he described this move as a mistake, and it is a mistake. Why? Because it opens up this square for the knight when the pawn moves forward. Once the knight comes here, then the knight is able to just wander around, making trouble for white. So the king comes forward so that this knight isn't pinned anymore. And the king comes forward, and the knight comes to d5 saying, okay, you take mine, I'll take yours. And Kramnik agrees to that, but he attacks the rook first. So the rook comes out of the way, and then he attacks this pawn before taking the pawn. So this pawn is attacked. He says check, and then now he's threatening rook here, which could be nasty. So the king says the king is checked, chase c7, and the pawn is won. But he soon gets it back with interest, because he gets 2 checks, and then he takes the pawn. And now it's 3 pawns against 2, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And a rook and pawn is worth 6 points of material, and 2 knights are worth 6 points of material. So this is a theoretical material balance, and both have the same number of pieces. It does have some drawish tendencies, there's no doubt about it. But the player who coordinates his pieces best must have an advantage. But I don't know. We'll see what the computer prefers. I actually prefer black here. Yeah, the computer says black's a long way ahead, because it's very difficult for black to keep defending all these bits. So the king is checked, comes forward out of the way, f6, lovely safe square. And the rook comes here, ready to check on f8. So a pawn is taken, and this pawn is now under threat. The rook gets behind the pawn, as it should. Bishop comes to bishop 2, and we see now that actually it's going to be really hard for Kramnik to get out of the mating net here. Pawn comes to a2, and indeed after rook to f2 check, white resigns. Why? Because if he goes this way, it's mate in 2, and if he goes this way, it's mate in 4. I'll let you work out for yourself what those mate in 2s and mate in 4s are. But yeah. So Topalov won the game, and with the game which had been conceded by Kramnik, that's Kramnik's lead wiped out. I just, you know, the irony, but it just makes it even more stunningly bad from Vladimir Kramnik, who himself has been a victim of accusations of cheating, Toiletgate scandal. It just makes it even worse what he has done to other players, and he keep harping on about these cheating accusations and using the word suspicious or interesting or whatever, accusing without accusing. They're just terrible, terrible stuff. Yeah. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my videos. A good win by Topalov, by the way. A nicely coordinated bunch of pieces, and yeah, so well played by Topalov. Even although I don't agree with his underhand accusation without accusing. Okay, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my videos. Thanks. Bye.